Welcome to everyone to today a cup of tea together talk with Lorenzo Micheli. So first of all, thanks to Lorenzo for accepting the invitation. And I think that we will have another guest later. It's coming also Diana Castelnuovo-Tedesco, the granddaughter of the great composer. And so it's very nice to see so many of you today. And I'm really glad that you are enjoying this series. I think that we have always a very nice atmosphere, so I'm very happy with that. And also thanks for all the messages that a few of you sent me in support for these events. So A Cup of Tea Together is organized by TU Dublin Conservatoire in collaboration with the festival Corde.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you, Marco. Thank you all for being here today. I took the cup of tea together idea very seriously. So I've actually got my cup of tea here. And the topic for today, we have discussed it with Marco, and we eventually decided that it would be Tedesco's Caprichos to Goya. I I want to I want to make sure that you know that this is not going to be a musicological essay. This is not going to be. I'm not going to deliver objective truths, which I don't have. It's mostly. It's not a quest for objectivity. It's just a personal attempt to answer a few of the questions that have been floating around my mind over the past years, and it's rather a way to discuss with myself and share with you my ideas and insights and thoughts about this complex work by one of the most important 20th century composer for the guitar. I think I should start with my my personal story with the Caprichos de Goya. It's probably the best way to start because I was 13 or 14 when I bought the score of the Caprichos. I remember at the time I would go to the old Corde store in the center of Milan, which today doesn't exist anymore. It has been replaced probably with Prada or Gucci, I'm not sure. And I remember buying these 4 books, the Quattro Quadernos, that are the published edition edited by Angelo Girardino. I will activate the full screen mode now. I hope you can all see. And I remember there was something that from the very beginning I found very attractive and very tempting about the Caprichos, which of course were far from being playable for me because of my skills and because it was way too difficult. But there was something interesting. It must have been, of course, the fact that there was this extra musical inspiration that attracted me at first. I was familiar with some of Castelnuovo-Tedesco's older guitar pieces, although I did not play any of them at the time because, of course, this music was way too complicated for my musical and technical skills at the time, and probably today too. So I started reading these Caprichos a little more than 20 years ago, and I think one of the first feelings I had, which was also something that a number of people I've spoken with later told me, is the impression that I was missing something. There was a lack of. I perceived that there was a lack of references. That I was missing some crucial information. It's almost like not having the geographical coordinates of something and not knowing exactly where to go. There was something about the Caprichos that was different from everything else I knew. There was something that was harder, and it wasn't just the technical aspect of it. There was something more complex. And so I've been going in and out, on and off with these Caprichos for years, and now as a part of as a preparation for a recording project that I've undertaken a few years ago, I've started thinking about them again in a more, profound way, if it's possible. And so, of course, there are a few important contributions. The first one being Billy Afshar's article that was published on Soundboards in 1989, if I'm not wrong, or 1990, but 1989. There have been significant complete recordings of the Caprichos. So we have, as far as sources, we've got both the bibliographical and discographical sources. I can mention here Frank Bungarsen and Philippe Lolis, and the latest one being Zoran Dukic, complete recording of the Caprichos. So we have quite a lot of material, but not a lot of objective information on why and why the piece was written this way, why this choice. So I would like to start from what we have. And what we have is a cycle of 24 pieces that have a composition date. Castelnuovo was very quick in writing music, so he wrote the whole 24 Caprichos between January 25, 1961 and March 18, 1961. So that's a remarkably fast creative process for a cycle that is this large. We have the composer's words because in his memoirs called Una vita di musica, a life in music or a life of music, Castelnuovo includes a chapter about the Caprichos. The Caprichos are actually the last piece he wrote for guitar that he discusses or that he mentions in his book. So this is a first-hand source. It is very important. And the book was written in 1961, which is the year of composition of the Caprichos. And Castelnuovo-Tedesco says, much later, in 1961, I have composed, fulfilling a promise that I had made a long time before to Segovia, the series of the 24 Caprichos, which are probably my most ambitious guitar work. They are too long, the cycle is too long to be performed in a concert. It would take an entire program. But anyway, to make the performance easier, I have divided the cycle into 4 groups, into 4 books. And yes, it can be recorded. The whole thing can be recorded onto LPs, onto records. And in fact, Segovia, who's full of enthusiasm, is hard at work on them. This is Mario Castelnuovo-Tedesco, 1961. So it provides a substantial, a great deal of information. The first one is he considers the Caprichos to be his most ambitious guitar work, whatever that means. And this is very important because, as we will see immediately after this, he has written quite a lot of guitar music. He says that he's aware of the fact that these pieces are probably too long. There's too much music to be performed in one single concert, which is a very interesting remark coming from the composer himself. And he tells us something else, which is even more interesting, that Segovia is working on them. Now, we know that, or we don't know, because I don't know exactly who's there. I wish I could see you all and say hello to everyone. So I don't know how much each one of you knows about these at all. You're not supposed to. So I'm sure some of you might know that the Caprichos de Goya are not dedicated to Andres Segovia, nor they have been recorded by Andres Segovia. Yet there are references to the creative process of the Caprichos throughout the correspondence between Segovia and Tedesco. There is a letter dated 1956, which is the year Tedesco composed the Passacaglia, where Segovia says something like, "I will be incredibly happy to have the Caprichos de Goya. It's a brilliant idea, it's a wonderful idea, and I'm sure you'll do it very well." And then there is another letter dated August 1960 from Segovia to Tedesco, where Segovia says, "Te pido que no abandones tu proyecto de Goya. I'm begging you. I hope that you're not going to give up on the Goya project." And this is 4 months before Castelnuovo starts working on the actual composition of the Goya. So there is, of course, there must be much more, but there's evidence that this idea of the Goya Caprichos has been the subject of a long-term conversation, distant conversation between Segovia and Tedesco, and that if Segovia is not the dedicatee of the work, he played a major role in pushing and suggesting, advising the composer to work on this project and to bring this project to completion. There's another letter dated June 1963, where Segovia talks about his future projects, and he says that he mentions the fact that he's working on one of the Caprichos, which means that he is planning to play in concert, which probably did not happen. Anyway, Castelnuovo starts working on the Caprichos on January 25, 1961. As you can see, this is the last page of the first Capriccio, Francisco Goya y Lucientes. And I was mentioning before that it is remarkable that Tedesco says that the Caprichos de Goya are his most ambitious guitar work, because as you all know, he's written, his catalog of guitar music is very large, and a lot of his works are large works, if not even cycles of pieces. And so the fact that he identifies the Caprichos as possibly his most demanding or most important work tells us something about the value of these pieces. This is a list of Castelnuovo-Tedesco's works with guitar, so not necessarily solo guitar music. It includes chamber music, it includes concertos. It is divided symbolically into two sections, where the two sections are separated by the exile. In Trieste in September 1938, Mussolini tells the people about the racial laws and their consequences on the Jewish community in order to please Hitler's policy. Sorry, I don't know if it was my fault. I hope not. So I was saying that this list is divided in two, and the first pieces, which are probably the most famous guitar works, were written while the composer was living in Florence, whereas the second half of the list consists of pieces that were written while Tedesco was living in America and upstate New York first, and then over to in California. And the Caprichos are down here towards the end of the list, in the last phase of the composer's creative career.
Sorry, Lorenzo, we cannot see the screen. You have to share it again, I think.
Yeah, sure. Here we go. Can you see it now?
Yes.
Great. So we go full screen again. So this is, it's taken from that list, and it's a short list of his cycles of music with guitar. It does not include music for voice and guitar, with the sole exception of Platero, because Tedesco himself thought that these pieces could be played on the solo guitar. So, although it's a cycle of pieces for narrator and guitar, they are considered more like solo pieces. We've got our Caprichos. We've got the Well-Tempered Guitars written for Presti la Goya in 1962, and his last unfinished work, Appunti, for the guitar students, dedicated to the guitar students. Now, this is a very similar list. It is the complete list of all of his cycles written for instrumental music cycles. So all his cycles of pieces written for an instrument. Again, it does not include his very extensive, very large cycles of vocal music, such as the Shakespeare songs or Vogelweide for guitar and voice. So as you can see in his outputs in the 1950s and 60s and late 40s, the guitar plays a leading role. It's unquestionably the instrument that he wrote more for. This is just a test to see if you're paying attention. It has nothing to do with Tedesco. It is James Joyce playing the guitar. So I thought something Irish would be appropriate to keep your attention awake in case you were sleeping. Good. So why the Caprichos? Why Goya? Why has he decided to embark himself in such a gigantic task? But first of all, what is a capriccio? A capriccio has a variety of meanings. It's capriccio is an Italian word. The etymology is questionable and questioned. It's questioned more than questionable. The most obvious idea would be that it comes from caporiccio, curly head, curly hair, in the sense of something the opposite of straight, also in a metaphoric meaning. You know, capriccio is a sudden desire to do something, very often without a good reason. Therefore, it has also an erotic meaning as a translation. It's something bizarre, it's something strange, and then it has two meanings, which are the ones that we want to think about. In music, it's an instrumental composition mostly, sometimes occasionally vocal composition, that has no fixed form, so which is free in the form. It has an almost improvisatory character. It's very free, and very often requires a substantial technical effort from the performer. And then something that is as important as these, there's a capriccio in figurative arts. And a capriccio in the figurative arts is usually it's a drawing that usually has architectural elements. So it's an architectural fantasy, more or less, where usually the artist puts together architectural elements such as ruins, columns, buildings, as well as other elements that can be either real or fictional or fantastic. So it's a capriccio, as we would say in Italian. It's something that does not have a reason, something where the elements that don't seem to have a very tight connection. It is important to understand the genesis of this capriccio genre in the figurative arts, because it is important in order to understand what Goya is doing, and it is also important in order to understand why Castelnuovo makes certain choices when it comes to writing the capriccios. For musicians, caprichos can be a lot of things, a lot of different things. These are Girolamo Frescobaldi's caprichos. Capricci for keyboard, which is one of the most demanding works written for the keyboard in the first half of the 19th century. And these are Niccolò Paganini's Capricci for solo violin. Guitar players are more familiar with other examples. This is Ludovico Roncalli's Capricci Armonici, in a sense that has nothing to do with the etymology we are discussing today, or with the meaning that we are discussing today. Roncalli's Capricci are nothing but instrumental suites written for the Baroque guitar. Although these are Luigi Legnani's Capricci. This is number 36, opus 20. As you can see, there's a certain taste for technical challenges, and there's a certain taste for technical gestures. So basically, all these Capricci, Paganini, Legnani, they are based on a single musical idea or a single musical gesture that is developed in a very free and creative way. This is another capriccio that has nothing to do with what we're discussing, but it displays a certain feeling for exotic that was very popular towards the end of the 19th century throughout Europe, and in a way that is not very far from the idea of the capricci in Italy and Spain in the 18th century. I'm not sure if you're familiar with this. This is Giovan Battista Piranesi, who was an artist and an architect from Veneto, from the area of Venice, that moved to Rome quite early. And Piranesi is traditionally considered one of the inventors of the capricci. These are architectural capricci or caprices. He's combining architectural elements that are real, but that when you piece them together, they don't make any sense. This collection of capricci is called Le Carceri di Invenzione, which could be translated the fictionary prisons. So they are depicting prisons that do not really exist. This is another example. I'm sure some of you might notice a striking resemblance with, for instance, Moritz Escher's prints, engravings. And in fact, Escher is very close to Piranesi's art. And so was Francisco Goya. When the inventory of Goya's belongings after his death reports that he was in possession of a copy of Piranesi's Capricci. And there's also another variant of the Capricci that is important to understand the genesis of Goya's Capricci and of Castelnuovo-Tedesco's. An Italian Rococo painter named Giambattista Tiepolo, who was also from Venice, was invited by the King of Spain around 1761 to the court in Madrid, and became one of the king's favorite painter. And Tiepolo's art is very Baroque and Rococo. It's full of color, but Tiepolo is also known for his collections of prints called Capricci or Vari Capricci, where he is more on the figurative side. Well, I mean, he's got figures along with architectural elements. So you can still see trees, architectural elements, stones, columns all over, but you can also see figures. And these figures have each of them has unquestionably a personality. There's a dog, a philosopher dressed up like a Greek philosopher, and this is the death, or it's a skeleton that probably is used to depict the death. Although we have no description, no titles, so we don't know exactly. What we know is that Tiepolo started this very successful genre where he's combining architectural elements and figures, human figures, and not only humans. And he puts them together in a way that is functional to the artistic expression, but not necessarily makes sense. As you can see, this is one of Goya's Caprichos, Muchacho Saladillo. You can see that Goya has learned Tiepolo's lesson. Goya was active in Madrid. At the same time, Tiepolo was there. Of course, Tiepolo was the old master and a successful painter, and Goya at the time was a very unsuccessful, very unhappy painter who was not accepted into the Real Academia de Bellas Artes de San Fernando, which was the Royal Academy of Fine Arts. At least he was not accepted at first. That means that there's always a second attempt, even for Francisco Goya. You can always try one more time. And Goya was much closer to Tiepolo's art than he was to the trending neoclassical art that was very popular in Spain around 1760s, 1770s. Now, I know you're probably very, very familiar with Francisco Goya's art, but there's something I wanted to show, two things I want you to see very closely and very quickly. This and this. They belong to the same hand. They're painted by the same person. And this is Francisco Goya at the time of his work for aristocratic families, Osuna, Alba, Altamira, and for the king. And this is Francisco Goya at the end of his life. These are the so-called pinturas negras, black paintings. They are extremely disturbing. This is a famous depiction of Saturn eating his own children, because he was told that his children one day might overwhelm him and overthrow him. So he was eating them all but one in Greek mythology. What happens in between these two paintings? Well, they belong to two different phases of the life of Francisco Goya. And the painter has a personal trajectory that is remarkable, almost unseen in any other European artists around that time. It's very similar to the trajectory that Beethoven experiences after he becomes deaf. There's a traumatic event. Well, there are many traumatic events in Goya's life. One is psychological, that is to say, the disappointment following the French Revolution and his political liberal ideas being completely disappointed by what happens next. So the French army invading Spain, and then the Spanish people throwing the French out, and then the restoration of the autocracy with King Ferdinand. So there is a big traumatic political disappointment, and there is his disease. Goya becomes deaf around 1792. Probably he gets poisoned by the lead that was inside the colors he used to paint. So his isolation from the rest of the world, which is very painful and very traumatic, becomes an incredibly powerful engine that pushes Goya's inner research, and of course generates an incredible transformation, which is both personal and artistic. So Tedesco, why Tedesco has chosen Francisco Goya's paintings? If I try to put together words that describe Goya's art, I can come up with such things as eerie or pessimistic gloomy, dark, distressing, anguished. And of course, is a painter that in his Capricci is criticizing and stigmatizing Spanish society, superstition, religion, and so on. There's nothing like this in Tedesco's music, and there's nothing like this in Tedesco's idea. There are, though, similarities. Goya becomes deaf at the age of 46, and that divides his life in two. Tedesco leaves his country and he moves to America as an exiled when he's 44 in 1939. This really splits their lives in two. There's a conflict in Goya that is quite unbearable for the painter himself. There's a conflict between his ideas, liberal ideas. There's a conflict between enlightenment and romanticism. There's a conflict between rational and irrational, which is very clear in his last cycles of engravings and drawings, such as the Caprichos, the Folias, and the Pinturas Negras. There is a conflict between the Francophile, afrancesado intellectual and the Spanish painter. And all this conflict is quite visible in his late works. There is a conflict in Tedesco too, although it doesn't come out as clearly as it does in Goya's painting. There's a conflict between, there's a conflict generated by the fact that he grew up Jewish in a Catholic country. There's a conflict between the fact that he's a conservative composer, a composer that bears the responsibility of a long tradition, and the fact that he's spending some part of his life in a world that tries to get rid of tradition and destroy conservatives in favor of what is called avant-garde. And also there is a conflict once he moves to the United States. There is a conflict between the European and the American. So he says, I will always be a European for Americans, and I will always be an American for Europeans whenever I go back to my home country. He will refer to himself as somebody who's suspended between two worlds. So it is not surprising that Castelnuovo has a feeling for Goya's painting. There is a letter that reminds of a visit that that Tedesco and his wife made to El Prado in Madrid in 1957. And that's where they had the chance to see the Caprichos for real. So in 1961, Castelnuovo composes the Caprichos de Goya. They're dedicated to his second son, Lorenzo Castelnuovo-Tedesco, who liked painting very much. This is something Castelnuovo recalls in his memories too. He recalls of an episode where he goes to the postal office, and when the employee at the post office sees his name on the envelope, he asks him, "Are you related to the painter?" And the painter is his son, which eventually ended up doing another job. But this is Lorenzo Castelnuovo-Tedesco with the Marx brothers in Hollywood. So there are 24 pieces based on the work of a major painter. So there's no better way, there's no better choice than dedicated them to somebody who wants to become a painter, and that explains why the work is dedicated to his son, which is not usual for his guitar music. As we read at the very beginning, the Caprichos are divided into 4 books. Castelnuovo explains why. Somehow he was trying to suggest a possible way of grouping the pieces. And somehow he's implying the fact that he would like performers to play entire books rather than picking up single caprichos here and there, which is something that today we don't do. We sort of make our own choices, which is perfectly legitimate. Most of these caprichos, as you can see, are dances. There's no descriptive intent in the Caprichos de Goya, so he's not writing. This is not program music. This is not the imitation in music, using the musical lexicon and grammar and vocabulary to describe something. This is based on, this is inspired after the Caprichos. So he's suggesting similarities rather than trying to describe things. This is why pretty much every single tempo marking, every single capriccio as the name of a dance. 16 out of 24 capriccios are dances. And this is why it's always written tempo di, in time of, or quasi, almost. So there's a tempo di fandango, tempo di furlano, tempo di badinerie, tempo di villancico, tempo di tango. You can see different colors here. The blue, light blue caprichos are the ones that are written in form of a Spanish dance. So fandango, villancico, dance, or Spanish musical genres. So there's a fandango, villancico, tango, habanera, jota, el vito, zorzico. And the ones in red are written in forms of a foreign dance. Furlana, which was originated in Italy, but then used everywhere in Europe, including by Bach or Ravel, for instance. And then badinerie, bourrée, minuetto. These are not random choices. The Spanish dances are used for those capriccios who depict popular scenes, whereas the French or Italian dances are used for those capriccios who depict aristocratic scenes. And this is quite systematic. There's no exception to these. And then there are non-dance related pieces that are written in black. Some of them are written on ground bases, such as the Passacaglia number 12, Chacon number 18. Some of them are written in a more articulated, in a more structured way, such as number 1 or number 24, which are both preludes, sort of a prelude followed by a fugue or a fugato. And then there are also different things, a serenade, a funeral march, and pieces that have no, do not belong to any genre or cannot be classified as easily. Although Linda Maestra is probably a jig. These are the criteria that he uses to create these musical settings of Goya's caprichos. At the end of each book, there is a dramatic, there's a tragic and very important piece. So there's El amor y la muerte, death and love at the end of book 1. No hubo remedio, there was no solution at the end of book 2. No hubo remedio is basically the description, musical description of an auto da fe, a ritual following the sentence, the death sentence given by the Court of Inquisition in Spain. There's a woman who's supposedly a witch, and she's been brought to she will be killed, she will be sentenced. And so he writes a Passacaglia based on the Dies Irae. And then there's a Chacon based on El sueño de la razón produce monstruos, which is a very important capriccio. It's funny, El sueño de la razón produce monstruos is probably nowadays his most popular capriccio, and it's also the most important in Goya's collection. This cannot be a coincidence. In Goya's collection, Goya's Capricci, published in 1799, includes 80 etchings, 80 prints. These 80 prints are divided in two groups. The first 42 are the satirical description of the Spanish society. And the last 36 are called Caprichos de Brujeria. So they talk about witchcraft and superstition. 43 keeps them separated. 43 divide them. And then there is one, the last one, El Sueño de la Mentira y Inconstancia, which is 24 in Tedesco's book, but it's not really a capriccio. This does not come from the capricci, but from the capriccios. This is taken from another collection that was printed before the capriccios, and that is called Sueños. And El Sueño de la Mentira y Inconstancia is, in Goya's, is depicting the fact that nothing is the way you see it. All see the main character, which is a woman, has two faces. The two faces are looking in two different ways. Her arms and her hands are holding different people. None of them can see the other one. And so it is about inconstancy, and it's about instability. It's about being unfaithful. And it's interesting, in Castelnuovo-Tedesco's musical setting, it is one of those capriccios that has certainly a key, which is identifiable with the minor, but where there's almost never a perfect cadence. So all the cadences or the harmonic movements are deceptive, and he almost never resolves. And when he's trying to resolve, he always goes somewhere else, which might be a way to describe. We're running out of time. Of course, this could go on much longer. This is William Butler Yeats, in case you were sleeping at the time, so somebody could spot. This character has nothing to do with today's lecture. The capriccios are different from everything else. Casanova has written for guitar because this form he's using is so unpredictable, and the music flows in such a free way. Even harmonically and even tonally speaking, it is sometimes, there is a majority of minor keys, but there's a group of capriccios towards the end where it's almost impossible to determine which one is the tonal center, because it's constantly switching, or like in the case of Volaverunt, as you can see here, the writing is so rich of chromatic passages that it becomes difficult. It's rich of 9 chords, 13 chords, progressions, so the harmony is constantly changing. Why the capriccios? Because I think, why has Tedesco chosen Goya among all the possible artists and painters that I'm sure he was even more familiar with? My guess is that these capriccios were the right occasion to reestablish a deep connection with Segovia, in which he was putting a lot of hopes and efforts. So Segovia might have played a substantial role. And the other thing that is quite clear when you read the capriccios is that this form, this free character, this tonal instability, it becomes somehow, the cycle becomes the ideal container for Castelnuovo-Tedesco's musical knowledge. And he can make, using the capriccio, using this free form, using this unusual writing on the guitar, this incredible metric variety, dynamic variety, all these tempo changes, all these harmonic changes, they become a way to make a synthesis, to make a combination of very distant, very different cultural reference, popular reference, academic references, Spanish music, Italian music, French music, music from the New World, music from the Old World. And in a way, the Caprichos de Goya, which the composer describes as my most ambitious guitar work, also become the most complex and most rewarding of all of his guitar music. And that's it, more or less.
Thank you, Lorenzo. It's a very beautiful lecture and very inspiring as usual. I have a few questions, but maybe it's better to first to open to the participant. And please, you can now turn on your video. Yes. And we can, and if you want to make a question, you have to send me a message in the chat. Okay, Carlos, you can go. I can.
Ciao, Carlos.
Lorenzo,
Ciao.
I want to ask you. First, you made some kind of announcement. Maybe you are going to record this Caprichos soon. It would be very good news for all of us.
Yes, well, I recorded one, number 18, 21 years ago. And then ever since then, I've been thinking about this. But again, it takes a while to absorb music in general. And so it's a very slow process because once you record, you cannot take a step back. So this is something that today, maybe it's not so, today where everything goes by very quickly, it is not so obvious anymore, but recording stays there forever. So
Yeah, because I personally love these recordings of your GFA CD of Naxos. They're really, really great. And the actual question is, despite you said that it's not descriptive, maybe there's kind of influence of the title or the image or the impact or the emotion or something, because in some way it is descriptive. Maybe not in the way of taking one figural element or aesthetic element, but if you see very, very dark drawing, very dark printing is also the music like this. And the other thing I want to ask you is at the beginning of some of the Caprichos, you can see it would be like a phonetical transcription of the Spanish language, like Francisco Goya y Lucientes. And I don't know if you know any relation of this, because a couple of these has like I would be for singing, obviously not for singing, but maybe some kind of relation of that Spanish language translated into rhythm, maybe I don't know.
well, yeah, these are very interesting questions, and this would be enough for another hour of discussions. I'll try to keep it as short as I can, which is notoriously not very short. But so descriptive, yes, you're right. They are descriptive, but what I meant is this is not program music. So Tedesco is suggesting rather than imitating, with a few exceptions, of course. There's the braying of the monkey in Sisabramasa, El Disciple, where he's using these dissonant intervals to suggest the voice of the animal. There are drums in the funeral march. There are things that are, there's the use of onomatopoeia here and there, but he's mostly describing a mood rather than trying to translate into sounds the action. Also, I have to say, it is quite clear reading Tedesco's words that of the actual meaning of some of these caprichos, he wasn't quite sure. And it's easy to understand. There are three different manuscripts, mostly held at El Prado in Madrid, that describe the content of the caprichos. The three of them give completely different descriptions, and it's sometimes they are really obscure, so it's not always easy to know. And I'm sure Goya did not really want the meaning of his caprichos to be clear, which turned out to be a failure anyway, because the caprichos were released on February 6th, and he had to withdraw them on February 8th. So they were on the market for only 2 days. The second question, it has to do with this inserts that he makes sometimes the words into the score. In the case of number one, I think the meaning is number one is a strong statement. Not numbers in number one, the painter is introducing himself. Number one is a self-portrait of Goya. It's called Francisco Goya, El Lucientes Pintor. Number one is also Tedesco's way of introducing himself. How can a composer like Tedesco introduce himself? Well, he does the thing that he can do like few other people can. He writes a fugue. There's an anecdote of Tedesco as a young student of Ildebrando Pizzetti. For 1 year, for 365 days, he wrote a fugue a day for Pizzetti. And of course, you can imagine poor Pizzetti every day. He said, "God, I've got another fugue by Tedesco to add it." But this is it's a story that says that his academic training, especially on counterpoint, was so strong that when he has to write a statement about himself, he writes a fugue. And so this is why he includes the text, probably just to make it clear that that's a self-introduction. There are other cases, for instance, I think Tal Paraqual has, if I remember correctly, has the text. And the other case I found is where the syllabation is very effective. And so when there is a very strong rhythmic figure, and when the words have a particularly effective sound, like Tal Paraqual, then he's basically trying to show that the opening motif, the opening gesture sounds like the title of it. So, and yes, I'm going to record them, but I've booked the recording studio 4 years ago, and then I didn't show up because it's too much work, but I plan to do it soon.
It's important to say, as Segovia said to Castelnuovo-Tedesco, don't give up with your Goya project.
Bravo, Carlos.
But then Segovia didn't listen to him.
Okay, the next question from Mike.
Am I on?
Okay. Yes.
Yeah, great. Hi, Lorenzo. Thanks very much. I'm just wondering, do you think maybe Tedesco may not have dedicated to the work to Segovia in order to avoid interference, or maybe that was the result of how quickly he wrote the thing that there was, because there's that history of I know just from reading Ponce letters and stuff like that, the back and forth about things, that desire not to share too much and just to get it out there. And also, did Segovia indicate why he didn't play it in the end, or?
Yeah, well, thanks. Another very good topic for conversation. I'll start from the end. No, Segovia did not indicate why he didn't play. Of course, today it's even too easy to say, oh, Segovia didn't play this because he didn't like it, because it wasn't close to what his feeling was. The truth is, Segovia was a very busy man, and he was writing to everybody, writing to all these composers, promising them, he would study and practice and play and possibly record all these pieces, which at a certain point became obviously impossible for anybody. Also for somebody who would spend all the time traveling around, performing. So it was constantly running behind schedule. It was trying to fulfill as many promises as he could. So I don't think that the fact that he did not play necessarily means, like today, we sometimes we tend to speculate that whenever he didn't play something, it's because he didn't like it, or because this was so far from Segovia's aesthetics that he decided not to play it. No, I guess he just didn't have the time. In fact, there's something I did not mention before. The letters between Segovia and Castelnuovo show that apparently Segovia was working on the edition of both the Caprichos and the Platero, which eventually were both published, after the composer's death by Angelo Girardino with Berben. And I don't think this is necessarily not true. I think when Segovia said these, I'm sure it probably was. And this might have changed, the destiny, the fate of these pieces, or it might have not. We don't know. But for sure, it does not indicate why didn't play. On the contrary, he says quite clearly that he's working on one of them and he wants to perform it in public. And I also it might have been that he did not dedicate to avoid interferences, but more likely he just didn't dedicate this to Segovia because it didn't have to do with Segovia's work. It had to do with his son's work rather. And I think it's a very elegant way not to dedicate a piece to Segovia. If you dedicate it to your son, how can Segovia question about it? but of course, this is just my speculation. It's just there's nothing objective, and I'm sure this is not the case. But yes, he would not accept interferences during the composition anyway. He would compose pieces and then he would discuss them with the performer, like he did for the sonata and for a number of other works. Sometimes he would, maybe argue about certain editing choices, but he was not the type of composer that would set limits to his own writing because of suggestions from the performer. The process was different. He would just write music and then he would just leave it to the performer. So I don't think that's the reason. It's actually interesting to see how Segovia really apparently was very, very interested in this Caprichos. And again, the reason why Segovia, who was at the time 64 and the busiest guitar player on earth, the reason why he did not play them has probably more to do with the lack of time than his lack of will.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Thanks. We have a question from Nicholas. Where is Nicholas?
Nicholas.
I cannot find you. You can unmute you, Nicholas.
Nicholas Rocca.
Yes, exactly.
Can I do this too? No, it does not let me. It's right next to Michael.
Okay. But because it's okay, Nicholas. Not fine. Okay, first maybe we can.
Sorry.
Okay.
I had problem with the microphone. Sorry.
Good
evening, Maestro. Good evening. I'd like to ask you, what do you think about the playability of this music and Castelnuovo-Tedesco's music in general, and these Caprichos in particular? And if you think that this manuscript needs a revision to be played. That's it.
You mean what I think of the published edition, or?
No, what do you think about the playability? So
the playability. Okay. Sorry.
Okay.
No, I did not get the first part.
Sorry for my.
No. It's my fault. I didn't hear well. The playability. That's of course, that has been probably the reason that has kept people away from these pieces for a long time. We all know that this music is pushing the player a little bit beyond the limits of the instrument. And of course, we need to make we constantly need to make compromises in order to be able to play the music and preserving the nature of the music and preserving the musical meaning of it. Of course, none of this music can be played without editing. None of the music can be played if the performer does not put in the performance his own technical skills, his own musical knowledge, his personal choices, and which is also something that makes the music always interesting and always rich, when everybody, based on his personal qualities, is obliged somehow to create his own version of the music. Gilardino made a very honest and very clear choice when he published the Caprichos, and so the text that was published by Berben is exactly the text that you can see on the manuscript. There have been no editorial choices, there have been no edits, which again makes it a little difficult to read when you pick up the score, although he provided the player with suggestions, OCS and this type of resources. But the text that we see is exactly the text that was written by the composer. This is the reason why I think it takes so long to really know this music, and it takes so long to understand what to do with this music. This is one of the reasons. And the reason is we need to understand exactly what is the gesture, what is the musical gesture behind the text. We need to understand what is the mood and what is the character in order to be able to make choices. So, usually the way we proceed is we take a score, we make our edited version, which is something all guitar players have to do sooner or later, and then we start thinking of the music and what to do with it. In this case, no editing can be done until we've got an extremely precise picture of what the musical content is and what you want to do with it. Which I think this is the plus, this is the actual extra value of the Caprichos, and this is also what makes them, to me at least, incredibly challenging. Also, there is a problem that you find elsewhere in guitar music. There's a striking contrast between the character of certain Caprichos and the actual tempos that you are obliged to choose, right? Linda Maestra or Ise le Quema la Casa, they are all Caprichos where, the ideal tempo is too far from our possibilities. So that's where we really need to find a musical compromise that does not damage the musical content, yet it makes it possible for us to pick up the pieces and play them.
Thank you, Lorenzo. Now we have a question from Sergio and then Fred. So Sergio.
Hi Lorenzo and everyone.
Ciao Sergio.
It's always a huge pleasure to listen to you. My question is connected to the previous one. Do you think a new edition of Caprichos will be possible today? I mean, a version that proposes a new solution based on the manuscript and alternatives to those of Gilardino. For example, it would be useful for the 18th Capriccio, where the alternatives are not always respectful of the theme. What do you mean? What do you think?
Okay, well, this is, of course, this is the mother of all questions when it comes to discussing, the publishing activity in the guitar world these days. We see a lot of new editions of everything. I have to be honest, in this case, I don't think we need another one. For at least two reasons. The first reason is we are not lacking any information. We are not missing anything when we read Gilardino's edition, because every single thing that the composer has written is there. And the second reason is the complexity, the level of complexity of this work is so so remarkable that no performance is possible if it's not based on each performer's qualities. That is to say, everybody has somehow to make his own version. If this doesn't sound too stupid, so so it's work. It's work in progress. It's like La Sagrada Familia in Barcelona. It will never end. This editorial work, it will never end. And whatever edition might be done, it would always be somebody's perspective. It will never be something that makes the music closer to what the composer wrote. Okay. So you know we can question about some of Segovvia's choices, and of course it has a value to be able to look at the original sources and find out that there is, for instance, there are missing pages of music, or the harmony was different, or the formal structure was different. In this case, it's just Sergio's view as opposed to Lorenzo's view, as opposed to Marco's, and we all can do different things with that music. And so it sounds like a Borges book, but basically there are as many Caprichos de Goya as players around. So in this particular case, no, I don't think we need one. But again, what is really important is that we don't underestimate the complexities of these pieces. You know, we went from zero to everybody wants to play Capriccio di Goya. Of course, I'm encouraging everyone, but also at the same time, it is important to understand what the music is about before making an attempt to play them. And I'm talking about attempts, which might sound a bit ironical in music, because that's what I've been doing myself for years, making different attempts to play the Caprichos. Some of these attempts failed, some were more or less successful, but it's a challenge that you have to face every single time you play one of these pieces.
Thank you, Lorenzo. We have a question from Fred. You can talk now, Fred.
Ciao, maestro.
Ciao, Fred.
Hi, Lorenzo.
Wow.
I think I speak for everyone that when I say we love your attempts, so keep them coming. But I just had a question about the grouping. You know, you mentioned the 4 books and how he split them up, and that each one kind of ended with the very dramatic and kind of significant. That's something I never thought about before. Do you think he wrote all of them and then decided how to group the 24 because they weren't kind of specific choices from Goya's 80? Or how do you see the grouping?
Well, thanks for asking. I have mixed opinions about it because, yes, I think he wrote, I think he made a plan at the beginning, and they are published in the order they were written. This is clear from the dates. So you can tell, you know, every piece has a composition date. So you can see that. And sometimes he wrote a whole book book 2 and 3. No, book 2 and 4 were written in 6 days. So he already wrote it in the final order. I think he had, you know, he wanted to make sure that at the end of each book there was a substantial piece of music, because he had in mind, he had this idea of, you know, each book being played separately, or one for each half of a performance. So it cannot be a coincidence that El Amor y la Muerte, No Hubo Remedio, El Sueño de la Razón, and El Sueño de la Mentira, they close each book. They are by far some of the most dramatic, some of the most effective. So there is a balance within each book. There is a certain balance within the frame of each book. At the same time, there are things that are mysterious to me. For instance, the key choice. the choice of tonalities, because sometimes you have 2 or 3 capriccios written exactly with the same key. So you've got, for instance, a number of capriccios in E minor, all in a row, which is unusual unless you think you have a vision of these capriccios that is closer to the one of a suite. Then the tonal similarity becomes a plus rather than a minus.
Just we have a question now from Paco. And then I think that we will do another one and then we have to stop. Okay, Paco, you can talk.
Okay, thank you, Lorenzo, for your talk. Just 2 questions. One is more academic, the other more personal. The first is you talked about Lydia Afshar's, I don't know if it was a thesis, if you could say a bit of other source material to investigate, because this is a seminal work of guitar and we can always investigate more. And the second one, more personal, which are your favorites, Capricci? Because we all have like our own selections, and why? It's a very personal book, but I like to know your opinion.
Thank you. I'll start with the personal question. It's a bit like if you ask me, do you like your mom or your dad more? But definitely, I have to say, I want to be honest, and this is not an understatement. I can say there are some that I understand better and some that I don't understand as well. And although little by little, every time I bring one more brick to the building, and the structure becomes clearer and the meaning becomes clearer. So of course I feel closer to the ones that I understand better, like we all do, but at the same time I'm fascinated by the ones that I don't understand as well. Of course, the ones based on the ground, the ostinatos are evergreens or favorite hits, like El Sueño de la Razón or No Hubo Remedio. But it's difficult to make a choice, and this makes this cycle a real cycle of pieces where each one is functional to the whole. And then as far as sources, yes, Lily Afshar, when she was a student of Florida State University in the late 80s, she made her dissertation on the Caprichos de Goya. And that was a very important contribution, because she was the one who started investigating the relationship, if there is any, between the prints, between the engravings and the music. And so she started, she focused on forms and dances, and if there is a sociological meaning associated with dances, and so on. And that has been the base for further studies. As far as I know, there is no organic contribution as of today, but I might not be aware of it. There are a numbers of theses, people that have written, their papers, dissertations, basically how to make the text, how to approach the text, and what choices to make, and so on. This has been the perspective so far.
Okay, the last question from Marcos.
Hello, Maestro.
Hello, Maestro.
Thank you for this wonderful lecture. I would like to ask you, as a pedagogue, what do you think is Caprichos' role, let's say, in the university level teaching in conservatories, or in general Tedesco's music? And what do you like to teach with these Caprichos to your students? Like what technical and musical concepts? Of course, we all know you can touch everything with every piece, but which technical and musical concepts do you teach with these Caprichos, or in general with Tedesco's music? What is your focus when you're teaching these pieces to your students? Thank you.
Grazie. Well, the last but not least, I would say this is the hardest question so far, in a certain way. I'm not sure there is a specific pedagogical value in this Caprichos. I think there is a more general musical value that has pedagogical consequences, which is something that can be said about all of Castelnuovo-Tedesco's music in general. What I think, the reason why I think this music is important, and the reason why I think this music has can have a didactic purpose, is that this is music that does not care about the players. This is music that was not written for a specific instrument, although the guitar was the medium, one of Tedesco's favorite mediums to express is an instrument he felt very close with for a number of reasons that would be long to investigate here. But at the same time, when he wrote music, he was not writing for the guitar. He was thinking of the voice of the guitar, but he was not thinking of an instrument. So that is that's an invaluable chance for students to accept a challenge where it's not about them, it's not about the instrument they're playing, it's not about their technique or their routine. So it's a music where the player should disappear, which does not happen very often in guitar music. You know, guitar music is very much about guitar players and guitar playing, usually. And this music is unusually far from the guitar words in many ways, even though it's one of our most important composers. And so it forces you to think of, you have to sing, you have to phrase, you have to breathe, you have to understand harmonic tension, because if you don't understand harmonic tension and colors, then the music is not going anywhere, which is also the reason why for many decades this music was considered poor in quality, because just people were looking at the wrong parameters. They were looking for the wrong thing, right? So, and the Caprichos really, if there is something you can teach at a pedagogical level, is similar to what you can learn in early music, the sense for the musical gesture rather than the sense for the form. There's no form. There's no development in a German sense. This is very Italian in under all other possible respect. So there's a sense for musical gesture. There's a sense for the lyrical idea of an horizontal line that moves and sings. And this is something that you can learn from the Caprichos, as you can learn from the Appunti or the easier pieces. Again, I have to confess, I try to discourage my students from playing the Caprichos. I have to be 100% honest. Unless they really want, and unless they really feel ready, because it can be a very frustrating experience. A very positive, but at the same time, yet a very frustrating experience, because what is written is more than what you can do. And this is something that can be very difficult to accept.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lorenzo. And I want to say also to Diana Castelnuovo-Tedesco that John, few minutes.
Yeah, sure. Put on the video. Ciao.
Ciao.
I'm here. I came in late because I screwed up the timing, but I was happy to hear the questions.
Thank you. Thanks for being here.
Thanks for coming. So we'll see next week with Fabio Zanon. And thanks again, Lorenzo.
Thank you all.
See you.
Okay.
Stay safe.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Ciao. Bye-bye.
Lorenzo, now we stay 10 minutes with my student.
I'll be here. I'm not going anywhere.